Hi everybody, it's meteorologist Brian Bennett. Here's the very latest update on Tropical Storm Ian. It's south of Grand Cayman. It's going to move to the northwest towards Cuba, become a hurricane, if not a major hurricane, by the time it reaches Cuba, and then remain a major hurricane in the southeastern Gulf of Mexico, and then start to lose a bit of steam as it moves a bit farther north. Now, the cone of uncertainty right now from the National Hurricane Center does include pretty much everybody from Fort Myers all the way up to the Florida Panhandle. But if the storm were to move right down the middle of this cone, it would take it right into the Cedar Key area and the Big Bend. Now, my job in this video is to try to narrow down this cone of uncertainty and also try to spell out what type of impact you can expect from this hurricane as it approaches your area. Here's a look at the storm wind field size right now, which shows you where the tropical storm force winds are. Not too impressive, gotta admit right now, but it is moving into a more favorable environment, and we are going to see that wind field spread. And same thing with the hurricane wind field as well. We'll see that start to develop and spread as well. So the storm is on the path for developing fairly rapidly. And one reason it's going to develop is it's moving into an area of lesser wind shear. These purple colors here over Dominican Republic and Haiti show you where we're getting some high wind shear. We have a lack of shading here in the Western Caribbean where the storm is. That means that we're moving into a very favorable environment for continued development. Looking at the visible satellite imagery, you can see that we have pretty healthy looking tropical storm with the anticyclonic upper level winds right now blowing off the storm, indicating a decent updraft. According to the dropsondes from the National Hurricane Center Hurricane Hunters, looks like we have a coupled mid and low level tropical system now. So as that moves into the very warm waters of the Western Caribbean, we do expect it to continue to develop and to develop pretty rapidly as well. I think we'll see some fairly rapid intensification. All right, here's a look at the GFS model, the American Global Model, and you can see that it is projecting the storm to move into the Big Bend area, which is a bit of a concession for it because it did have it moving into the Florida Panhandle, but it finally backed down and started to agree with some of the other models and has it moving a bit farther east. And again, this is the 12Z GFS run, which has it moving into the Big Bend area. Now, taking a look at some of the global models from across the world, including some pretty big hitters here, including the European ECMWF model, and you can see that it actually has the storm making landfall late Wednesday in the Sarasota area. Take a look at the German model, the Icon. It has it making landfall right around Manatee or Sarasota counties. Same thing goes, Sarasota. On the Korean model, the KMA, let's take a look at the Australian model, the Access G, right around Sarasota, St. Pete area. Take a look at the UK Met, same thing, Sarasota, St. Petersburg area. So a lot of the global models are calling for the landfall to be a bit farther southeast than what the American GFS model is calling for. So I wouldn't be too shocked if the storm track from the GFS and the National Hurricane Center were to drift a bit farther east over the next day or so. Now here's a look at the GFS ensemble models, and what I would like for you to take from this are, well, first of all, starting by looking at these colors here, you can see that we have kind of the pinkish colors here in the lower latitudes, and when you get farther north you see more yellows and blues. That's because we're expecting a major hurricane, basically Fort Myers, Sarasota latitude, but once you get farther north the storm will start to encroach upon some greater wind shear from a long wave trough to our north, and that's going to kind of beat up the storm and weaken it. So if the storm makes landfall anywhere from Fort Myers up through the actual Bay of Tampa itself, then it would likely be a Cat 2 or Cat 3. If it makes landfall from St. Petersburg up through, let's say, Citrus County, it would likely be a Cat 2 hurricane. If it makes landfall up around Cedar Key, probably a Cat 2, maybe a strong Cat 1. If it makes landfall in the northern part of Florida, in the Florida Panhandle, it would likely be a Cat 1 hurricane. So where it makes landfall will have an impact on the intensity that we see from the hurricane. Okay, here's a computer model that I hand-picked for you. This is the icon model, not necessarily on an average day the most accurate model that you might see for hurricane modeling, but it does match what I think is going to happen with this tropical system as far as landfall goes, and also the intensity as well. So let's look at the icon model, and you can see the storm kind of moving off to the north-northeast once it gets into the Gulf of Mexico, and you can see it making a landfall right around Citrus County, or perhaps Cedar Key area in the very southeastern part of the Big Bend. But what is also of concern here is how close it is to parts of Manatee, Sarasota, Pinellas County, Pasco County, and western Tampa Bay. And that means that some of those strong winds from the hurricane could mix in and actually make for hurricane force winds around the coastal areas of western Tampa Bay. And if that does happen, that would happen late Wednesday evening, and that's something we'll definitely have to keep an eye on, as we don't want to be in that eastern eye wall, which is what the model is currently forecasting, because that's where some of the strongest winds would be with the hurricane. And even if it doesn't officially make a landfall, we could still see some really strong winds, especially in our coastal areas. That right quadrant too, not a good one to be in either, because you have the strong winds with the storm system, and then you add on top of that the forward motion of the storm as well, and that's where you see some of those stronger winds and bigger storm surge as well. What about rainfall total? So yeah, we could see storm surge flooding, but we can also see freshwater flooding as well. And the purple color here, this is an estimate from the icon model indicating the possibility for 1, maybe 2 feet of rain right along that center of circulation, and then kind of shutting down quickly once you get away from that eye. But yeah, right around that landfall, we could see 1 foot or 2 feet of rain, and if that shifts east or westward just a little bit, then that will bring that heavier rain possibly into your location, and that could include Pinellas County or even parts of Anna Maria, or a bit farther west if it were to progress a bit farther west as well. So strong winds obviously are a concern, especially in the coastal areas and especially in northern Tampa Bay and northern Florida as well. And heavy rain a possibility. Storm surge and very large waves also very likely too. Here's a look at the European computer model, which the European is taking it onshore a bit earlier than I think may happen, but it still kind of gives you a good estimate here as to the type of waves we could be looking at. The pinkish color here represents waves that are on the order of 50 feet. So that means that if a 5-foot story building, were out in the Gulf of Mexico, it would be completely mowed over by a wave from this hurricane. So very large waves. Please don't go out on a boat on Wednesday or Thursday or even Friday for that matter, as we will have very rough seas. Some of those large waves will translate to the immediate coastal areas as well. Obviously they won't be 50 feet, but they will be quite large as well, which will lead to beach erosion, and then add on that on top of storm surge, and we're looking at some coastal flooding possible in parts of Tampa Bay, maybe even in the bay itself, and also all the way up into the Big Bend. Basically everybody that's in the right front quadrant of that storm will see storm surge flooding. Keeping in mind that the winds rotate counterclockwise around a tropical system, so those onshore winds, that storm surge will occur if you're on the right front quadrant, which would be the second half of the storm as it progresses up through perhaps the very western tip of Tampa Bay and up into the Big Bend area. Now, to complicate factors a bit more, we are looking at very high tides as well. And look at this high tide for Clearwater on Wednesday night, Thursday morning, 3-foot, 2-inch high tide. That means on top of the storm surge that we're going to experience for parts of Tampa Bay and up and through the Big Bend, we're adding 3 feet of water because of an astronomical high tide. So very high water due to onshore winds, and high water due to the high tides as well. So kind of a double whammy there with the tides and the onshore winds. Here's a look at the Hurricane Hunter aircraft. You can see that it is doing circles right now in the Western Caribbean, getting all the helpful data so we can implement it into the computer models. They are dropping those drop signs into the hurricane, And again, that will be integrated into the model by tomorrow. So very useful information coming out of the hurricane hunters. Here's a look at hurricanes that have made landfall in Florida over basically the last 120 years. And Pinellas County has only had about 8 landfalls of a hurricane over the past 110, 120 years. And you can see a lot of Tampa Bay and the Big Bend, they don't really see many hurricanes. Now you head down towards South Florida and the Panhandle, and when there are more hurricane landfalls, but not quite as much for Tampa Bay and the Big Bend. So we're looking at a potential hurricane landfall, potentially a very strong landfall in an area that doesn't typically see a lot of hurricanes. So this will be something we have to watch very closely. Obviously, I'll continue to update it, and please stay tuned to the National Hurricane Center and your local officials as well. Until the next update, everybody stay safe. Continue those preparations if you're in western Tampa Bay or parts of the Big Bend, even the Florida Panhandle. And then everybody else in Florida should be keeping a very close eye on this storm as well. All right, guys, have a great night, and we'll talk again tomorrow.